All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia Hill, and welcome to the Black Mental Health Matters. Mission here is to push the dialogue around mental health among Black communities. And today we have a special guest with us discussing the topic of improving your mental health with foods. All right. Thanks so much, everyone who stuck around to watch that. Such an important video to get you to figure out this echo here. Okay. Can you hear me? I'm not sure why there was an echo there, but I'm not sure why there's hopefully. Okay, so I want to go ahead and get started. Today, we are talking about improving your mental health with food. And our guest today is Brathwaite, the CEO and founder of Eat for Success, LLC. Brianne Brathwaite MS, RDN, CDN, CDN, is a passionate advocate for the intersection of mental health and nutrition. And as a registered dietitian and authenticity coach, she empowers individuals to build a holistic foundation between food, body, and mind for education and counseling. So I'm so glad she's here with us. Everybody, let's go ahead and welcome her here. Hello. And I'm so thankful you are here also because I don't know if anyone can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I definitely can hear you.
Okay. Well, I think, let's, okay, great. Well, I couldn't hear you, so sorry about that pause there. But anyway, we are talking about such an important topic, improving mental health with food. And that's not for the general population. We're talking about Black Africans and Black African Americans and all other Black folks across the world. Improving our mental health through food is probably one of the top issues to tackle mental health in our communities. So I'm so glad we're talking about this topic today. So basically, I first want you to take some time to introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Yes. Hi, everyone. As was just said, my name is Brianne Brathwaite. I am a registered dietitian and a authenticity coach. In my daytime job, Eat for Success actually helps people heal from eating disorders and disordered eating. And so that is very much a part of mental health with food and that healing process. And then I'm also an authenticity coach, which means that I help people build a closer relationship with their authentic self and the confidence to put that out into the world and live their life on their own terms. And in my free time, I am a food tour guide for a company called Taste of New Haven, where I live in New Haven, Connecticut. And I get to take wonderful groups of people on tours to go to different restaurants. And that's just something I do for fun. I don't think I can even call it a job, but those are kind of my interests. So a lot of food things going on. Oh, no, I don't think we can hear you anymore.
There we go. Sorry, I was muted. Just wanted to give you some time to speak to the people, but um, so I'm so glad to hear you do that in your free time because that's a great example of maintaining mental health, I think, keeping those extracurricular activities for yourself. So thank you so much for introducing yourself. Let's go ahead and get into the questions, into the topic, improving mental health with food. So my first question for you is how does food affect the mental health of a Black person, an African person?
Yeah, and I think that's a really wonderful question to start off on. And it's very multifaceted. So I think the first part is I always say our relationship with food is almost aligned with our relationship with life, right? And so it's really important to kind of look at how we interact with food. Most of the time, food can be we eat food for different reasons, even if we don't initially see it that way. So we can eat food for comfort. We can eat food for fuel. We can eat food for celebration. We can eat food to connect with our culture. We can eat food to share an event with someone. And so I believe that kind of having a mindset around food that allows you to go in between all of these different areas without judgment is so important. However, I think it's really important to note that much like, and I will say this for African Americans in particular, there have been a lot of different traumas related to food over the years in African American history. And so some of those places that we go to access food have trauma rooted in them, whether it was the colonization of our foods, whether it was not having the ability to eat, having scarcity, and in general all of those things play a role in how we eat and how we pick foods today. And then ultimately, all of the other parts of mental health intersect. So, stress. And as we all know, Black people have a lot of racial stress and also generational trauma that causes stress in the present day. So it's really important to look at food as not just this thing that we eat, but more so as a collaborating effect with all of the different intersecting parts of mental health.
Thanks for that explanation. What are the main issues affect mental health that you've seen? What are the disorders that food is kind of intertwined with?
So I think it's, as I said, like I'm going to be talking in a very meta standpoint because it's so intricate, but I think one of the biggest points here is accessibility. Do we all have access to all foods? And if we do we have lifestyles that line up with certain foods being prepared and made? And then also, what are the things that come out of, you know, having this food trauma. And so that could look like emotional eating, that could look like binge eating, and then that could also look like, on the flip side of things, you know, dieting or going through dieting cycles or feeling as though you're not doing enough with food. And I think that goes into a larger part of the system of healthcare where there are certain markers for Black bodies that are not meant for us. And therefore, we're trying to subscribe to being a certain, I don't know if you've heard this term before, but BMI, like a basal mass index, which is basically a marker of where your weight should be. But upon greater look, I mean, even the American Medical Association has come out with saying that that might not be accurate for all people. And so I think it's just like we're in this stage of, well, what do I eat? And also, like, what do I have access to? And what have I been told in the past? And how do I feel about myself, my body? And then also, how does that intersect with food?
Thank you. So, you talked a little bit about this, touched on it a bit, but I wanted to know what are the most common eating disorders in the Black community? And really, how do we destigmatize that topic? Um, how do we get folks to talk about it more?
Yeah. So the right now in the literature, and I say that because the literature is and has historically been very catered to white individuals. The setup of how you would even study eating disorders in a community would be for them to be in a residential or in a program. These programs are highly expensive for the most part. You have to take time out of your life to go to them, a significant amount of time, meaning that you may not be able to work. And that might not be an option for some people. And then, of course, the literature shows right now that binge eating disorder is the most common amongst the Black community. However, I will tell you, I have had clients who have other eating disorders, such as anorexia or bulimia. Um, and so I think, or even like sensory around food, like disorders. So I think it's the literature right now says binge eating disorder, but I think it's so underserved and so under researched that I don't know if that's completely accurate.
You said sensory issues around food?
Yeah.
I'd
Um,
love to talk more about that. Explain um, can you explain more about that?
Of course. So, anyone who may have any kind of neurodivergency, so that could be like autism or ADHD, um, OCD, and maybe like very high anxiety, could also suffer from what people may call ARFID, which is basically a term for a complete distaste in food. It's not rooted in like I want to be a certain body size, or it's rooted in general disinterest in food. And then with that comes struggles with textures with food, and colors with food. And so it makes it really hard for that person to be able to have enough nourishment to actually maintain a body weight that would be good for their body. And so it can be really hard. And I think, it can also be really hard on the family, because I know that, like, it's hard when like you have a child that's really picky and won't eat anything. And it's hard when that phase doesn't, you don't grow out of that phase. That's there for your whole life. And so it's a struggle between not maybe understanding that you might have sensory issues with food, and then also having to kind of defend that to everybody else, causing more of that like isolation and that depression. And so it's really interesting. As I said, I think now more studies are coming out, but again, a lot of eating disorders are rooted in trauma. And so I think it is very, very, very strange that it's not also centering um, Black people. I don't think we can hear you. Technology these days. Bear with us for one moment. Technology these days. Bear with us for one.
Hello?
Yay, you're back.
Hmm. Okay. Oh my gosh. It said I had a browser issue, connection issue. So thanks so much, everyone, for keeping on while I was dealing with that technical difficulty there. So anyway, let's get back into it. I was talking about food insecurity and how it's linked to poor mental health. And I wanted to know your expertise or your thoughts on how finances are affecting our ability to sustain good mental health. How does that weigh in?
Absolutely. So, one of the things is the basically looking at everything in especially the social determinants of health, right? So, finances are a big part of that, right? Do we have First of all, do we have a job that gives us insurance, right? Because any medical service outside of insurance is expensive, any medication, any you know, place that you could get any kind of counseling. Everybody has a price. So does your job give you insurance? Now the next question is it good insurance? Are your copays an acceptable amount of money that works for you and your family? Or is it like, please don't take me in an ambulance to the hospital and take me to the clinic because that's cheaper? Where are we in this moment? And then also looking at what that looks like about what's around you, what's that environment, right? If we have financial stability, we might be more likely to have certain things like, a home in a area that has more food diversity, or a car, so that even if we're not in one of those areas, we can at least get into the car, get some gas, and drive to a place where that is. Maybe perhaps we'll have different appliances in our kitchen that can assist with cooking times and so that we can do other things. And so I think it's really important when it comes down to mental health, all of these things in a world where we're constantly working, we're constantly doing things, is they're so important because they take a little bit of the edge off versus maybe not having a place that you feel like is home and safe for you. Uh, and in that situation, you're already in survival mode, which is not a mode that is really good with being present or calm or mindful. And then also the situation compounds if you don't have the resources, or you don't have you're in what I would call a food apartheid state, which is an area that just doesn't have variety, and only has one type of food, and has actually been pretty much engineered that way with either gentrification or redlining, which are two processes of shifting people out of their place and out of their spaces into other spaces. And then also that can be harmful because the community has to shift, and what is the new community looking like, what is accessible to them. So finances really affect our mental health because what we can do, or what means we have to do things with, is super important. Not to say that you can't find ways to make it work, but as I said, we are all in this state of constantly doing things, having all these responsibilities. It can be a lot for one person or even two people to really keep up with the pace of life and also be struggling with finances and availability and sustainability.
Great. And so, on the flip side of that, or knowing that, what can we do to improve? I know that in your blog post, you talked about how uh, Black communities are a lot of times sat next to, corner stores, the bodegas, the things that don't sell very healthy food. Um, I think it's important to go the route of ownership and kind of get our communities to do that kind of thing. But what are your thoughts on moving ahead of this? How do we get ahead of um, the food insecurity thing and making sure that we have healthy food?
Okay, so that question I have thought so much about. Prior to owning my own business, I was a nutrition community educator. And so my job was to go into different communities, much like the ones that we're referencing, and basically bring food and do a cooking demonstration, also do nutrition education. And so that program, I was only one person and it was one person for an entire county. So I do think that having access to nutrition education is really important, but not just nutrition education from someone who looks like us, who understands, who knows the foods that we are going to be eating and is able to work with the unique challenges of being Black. And additionally, I believe that, there are some really amazing grassroots projects that are popping up in areas that have the food apartheid going on. There are people who are making urban gardens. They're actually, raising garden beds and planting foods and having their own distribution. There are people who are, in the community who are getting farmers markets started and really trying to make sure that, especially, there are some farms that do have a lot of crops over the years, and if they don't sell them, they will give them away for discounted prices. I think it just means kind of coordinating that and really also having community meetings. One of the cool things that I learned when I was a community educator was that when the food bank would drop off produce, if it was in a building, let's say it was like a retirement home or just a housing unit, they would drop off all of these fruits and vegetables in the main room, which means everyone had to come out of their living spaces and go down and commune over the food. And sometimes I'd see people fighting over lettuce, not very often though. We always had enough lettuce. But I would also see the fact that people were coming together and they would share how they would use the ingredients. And it made more of a wholesome kind of socialized space. And having that environment means that more people will want to have these conversations. For example, the bodegas. Yes, the bodegas are going to sell what the bodegas are going to sell. But I remember that in certain neighborhoods that I'd gone to, particularly in the Bronx, New York, there's these new bodegas that are popping up, and they have all of these different options. And I remember, because I'm a curious human, I was like, why did you move here? Why do you have these options? And he was like, well, people kept asking for oats. People kept asking for these things. And so we just decided to move in here, and it's been better. And so I think like the more education, the more conversations, the more grassroots initiatives, slowly the community can change. But I think this is like kind of not the most sustainable for every community. And realistically, this is more a systemic issue than we need to get our bootstraps together and put more work on our plate and just force ourselves to take on our whole community and on top of all the stress that we have. I think it really also looks into like policy. And so one of my things for the next year is to really look at policy as a dietitian and see where I can personally advocate. But I think that also goes into just letting people know that they can advocate for themselves and their needs, and that they have more power than they may think. What we choose to consume, what we choose to look at, we've seen there are influencers who, they make thousands and millions of dollars just because we watch them. And so, like, knowing that your interests do have weight in a way. But I definitely think this is a problem that was created um, by the distrust between, the distrust and also the discarding of Black people in this country.
Very useful information. And um, you already answered the question, but about how do you keep up with what is actually working with addressing this issue and what's not. Um, but no, you didn't answer that question. What is working with addressing food insecurity and what's not?
So, what is working is community based work. As I said, the farmers market, the urban gardening, the grassroots efforts. What isn't working is the consistent kind of thought process that people who are living, or Black people in general, should be solving their own problems. Because, again, as I said, like, we're already spread thin. And then for, government agencies to only step in but a little bit is just not helpful. I also think nutrition education is really important. There are so many different diets out there. People are saying so many different things, and some of them are based in fact, and some of them are based in just complete nonsense. And I think with the incidence of social media being so high, it's almost like sometimes people will send me social media posts and they'll be like, is this real? Or they'll be like, why didn't you tell me this? And I'm like, because that's incorrect. Because that's not how our bodies work. Because that's not what food is going to do. And so, like, because we have this platform where people are basically making money off of selling things to people, it's hard to discern what is really beneficial information for nutrition and what is just someone trying to get your attention. So you press the like button, follow them, and buy their 30-day plan. Which one is it? And I think that we're unfortunately in a place where people have more access to technology than actual, like, food security, which is insane. So then you think about it, you're hearing all of these things, you're following all these people, you don't know what their credentials are or how they came to be, but this is what you have access to and at the time.
Very important point about misinformation and how it relates to our food success. I did want to ask you, so speaking of just what's most popular or what's right in front of our faces due to technology being available more than education, what are your thoughts on things like CMOS? Is that something that you would recommend folks use?
Okay, so I have a food philosophy and it's called all foods fit. Okay, so CMOS can fit, right? But I think the way CMOS has been branded in our community, first of all, I'll just disclosure, I'm from, well, my parents and my family's from the Caribbean. And CMOS is something that they drink, they eat. It's basically something that's just there. And it does have benefits. It has a lot of different minerals and vitamins. However, I think minerals and vitamins are great, right? We need them, point blank, period. However, when we look at, like, the caloric content, when we look at all of the different parts of it, CMOS is just one of the points that we can hit, right? It's like if you took a multivitamin every day and you said, okay, I don't need to eat anything today, I'm good, I took my multivitamin, right? Like, no, we need protein, we need carbohydrates, we need fats, like, all of these things are here. So I think sometimes what will happen is we'll give a food this, like, superhero savior complex. If you just do the CMOS, you're going to be healthy. And it's like, okay, yes, I'm sure that you can get more minerals and vitamins from sea moss, right? But there are also other things about sea moss that we need to kind of consider, right? We're in America. We don't know where the sea moss we get is coming from unless someone's like really sourcing it from a place. You have to do that research. But again, and there's so much discrepancy when it comes down to supplements, right? And other things that we're ingesting. Like, who's making it? Is it being made sustainably? Is it also at the quality of the sea moss that you would find in the Caribbean? And so I think all of these thought processes are important. Also, I don't know if anyone's ever tried to make sea moss from scratch, but sea moss from scratch takes a while. You're not just like taking the sea moss out the bag and having it. You have to boil it for hours. You have to then blend it or make it into some kind of mixture. After you've done that, ultimately, it's if you're going to make it, you're probably going to make a pot of sea moss. And then you have to jar it up, and then it's good for in the fridge for maybe about 7 to 10 days, but you can freeze it. Ultimately, I think sea moss is great to have as an addition, but I don't think it's the savior of all foods. And so I think that's kind of like that process, right? Like we want to add nutrition, but we don't want to get caught up in the superfood or in the three best foods for blah, 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 right? Because that means that we're limiting ourselves and also questioning like what are the foods that we're eating that people aren't talking about in mainstream media that have tons of nutritional value that we then demonize because we don't see it being said and we want to stick to what is quote unquote healthy.
Great. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Moving ahead here, you in your writing, you also talked about food and colonialism. Did we touch on that already? How Black people were forced to deal with scraps out of slavery. Um, I wanted to know in your research, what habits have you seen remain from back then that are or aren't good for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, when Black people were enslaved, obviously the conditions were inhumane and horrifying. And one of the things that uh, slave owners did was they would use food as a carrot, um, and also reward with food for. I actually don't know what that looked like because I wasn't there, but they would use food as a carrot, essentially saying like, if you do good, you may or may not get the carrot. If you do bad, you are going to not get the carrot, and also other kinds of very torturing, horrible processes that they took. And so one of the things that I think about is the scarcity mindset, right? And the scarcity mindset goes into a place of you are worried about not having enough. And this follows people even when they do have enough, even when they have the means, even when they've gotten to that place, it comes from a place of not having and possibly not being able to. So, like, where, slaves were fed scraps and probably were not fed, a consistent amount every day with foods that were like just, in diverse and all of these different things, they would always be like, where's my next meal coming from? And if we think about what that looks like right now, that looks very much like food insecurity. Where is my next meal going to come from? So what the body does biologically is it goes, okay, what do we need for survival? We need glucose. Glucose is what everything breaks down in, or most of our food breaks down into, and that's what fuels our body. If there's a huge conversion, it's turned into ATP, which is basically energy in our body. And so it will gravitate towards very calorically dense and carbohydrate rich foods. And when we think about what that looks like, um, sometimes that can look like different options, right? So if we're thinking about like different kind of candies or pastries or some kind of, casual food like McDonald's or Burger King. It just wants the quickest route of energy, and the quickest turnover of glucose. And so, there becomes this moment of always being on the rush with food, not being able to be mindful with it, not being able to figure out, well, am I hungry? Where am I right now? Should I be planning for my meal? Because we're still in this very interesting survival mode area. And also, again, with that, I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I don't think I have stability. And it's been seen that even after sustainability, or there is a place where it's like, okay, I do have the means. I can go out and get groceries. I can come back home. I can cook them. I do have time to do something. That mindset still applies, especially in high stress environments.
Mm, very interesting. And I really liken it to manipulation. I mean, they literally manipulated those who were enslaved with the food, kind of dangling it in your face. And that's what you were saying about the carrot thing. Um, so that's unfortunate, and I think we do need a way forward with addressing those leftover food scarcity thoughts and feelings. Um, but I also wanted to talk about before it, folks were enslaved. What were those traditions, and what have you seen in your studies? What was it like to eat in our native land, for lack of better words?
Yeah. So, in my research, and also talking to people who have been born in parts of Africa, there is this very, like, and I was talking about the socialization of food, right? There is this community effort, right? So it wasn't every person for themselves. The family, or the community would think about, okay, we need to make enough food for everyone. Everyone's going to come, everyone's going to sit, everyone's going to take pieces, everyone's going to partake, you know? Even just the way that food is made, right? Where we're going out and we're getting these foods, and they're fresh, right? They're fresh. They are also whatever is on hand and whatever can be um bought at the time. And so, this thought process of things being available all times of the year. Just knowing that, like, there might be seasonal things. There's also things that have been passed down in families for generations, different kinds of cooking processes. So one of the things that I've been recently looking into is fufu and how it's made, and also, like, what are the ways that people make them. And it's been really interesting. You can see a lot of different ways of making fufu. You can also see a lot of different flavors that are coming out. But I think most importantly, like, even the process of making the food is passed down. And so it's coming from a very, like, true, I want to say, I think it's a very true and honest place, and also is being shared. So there's somewhat of a soulful aspect to the food, you know thinking about versus here, like, sometimes families may have dinner together, but sometimes they may not, which leaves, children to kind of figure it out. And it's not because they don't want to have dinner together, it's just because that is maybe not set as a priority, because of all the things that are happening. So I think that food takes on a more soulful, and also there are so many different types of plants, and all of the things are like indigenous to who they are. Um, Not to say that you can't get different kinds of food in Africa. I want to make that clear. But just saying that, like, there is a source of this is home, much like the Caribbean, like there's a sense of this is home, this is what we have, this is what's been harvested, this is what we're doing.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about what you do as far as the meal planning and education, and how it's going?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that? I think it was a little.
Ooh, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to know about your practice, what you're doing to improve all of this, the meal plans, the education. Can you tell me about it? And where are you
Yeah.
located?
Yeah, so my organization is virtual. So most of our appointments are virtual. And I made that decision because, first of all, just so everyone knows, Black dietitians are about 3% of all dietitians. So seeing a Black dietitian just walking around every day, I don't know about that. And also, I think about the schedules that everyone has and how busy they are. And so sometimes driving an hour or 30 minutes can also be a barrier, even if someone doesn't have a car, right? What does that look like? And then, of course, the other things that I do are I will meet someone, I'll talk to them about what their goals are, and then we start a relationship, is what I call it. Because I think with providers, sometimes there's this thought process that the provider is the expert. And in my practice, I say you are the expert. You inherently know what works for you and what doesn't, but you might just need guidance, and I can help you with that. But I can't assume knowing what's best for you.
Great, thank you so much. Also, what foods are you seeing people talk most about? What are they wanting to keep in their diet and lose?
Yeah, so I think we can transition because, as I said, like mental health and food, there's figuring out how it came to be, where it originated, and then there's figuring out how your relationship with food is and why. And then there's like, well, what are the foods or what are some of the foods? And so some of the foods I would say are that we've studied and that we've seen have been helpful are fatty fish, things like salmon, trout, tuna, herring, sardines, mackerel. All of those are important for our brain as it is made up of fat. And the omega 3s within these fish are what help to build nerve cells and help with like learning and memory and slow down age related mental decline.
Awesome. Are there any specific uh, well, first, I want to go to one of our quotes. We had someone chime in, Frank Charlton Pharma, and he's saying jelly water, palm nuts, seeds, soursop, banana, and fruits, and many more are good for our brain. Eat your Africa diet, he says. What are your thoughts on these these different foods that he is saying are good for our brain, and is it true?
Yeah. So um, I think what I'm seeing here is like we're citing fruits, we're citing seeds and nuts. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what jelly water is, but it does have hydration in there. So I'm going to just put that there. But I think it's probably, if I could guess, it's probably something that has like hydration boosting properties. But what I would say is like, yeah, that kind of follows what the studies show, right? Like they show that nuts and seeds are really important. They show that vegetables and fruits are very important. And that just proves that the diets that are indigenous to our people are alongside what the research is. They're just not cited, right? So if I look at top 5 foods for mental health, I'm not going to see soursop, right? I'm going to see like blueberries, raspberries, things that are just more like noted in America. But that doesn't mean that like our foods aren't there or they aren't important. And in some cases, the foods that we are using have more nutrients.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Frank Charlton Pharma, for your comment. We appreciate your comment and your views as well. So I want to get into a little bit about the term comfort food because we hear that a lot in the Black community, especially in the United States. That includes what? Greens, yams, sweet potatoes. Um, what else do we have? Ham, I think, would be considered one. So, the traditional, what you see on the Thanksgiving table in a Black household. Um, aren't always necessarily healthy for us. So, how do we get how do we make our comfort food something that's nutritious for us, and get away from, I guess, the feeling and our cultural connection to it?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's something that I have tons of discussions on. I think for one, like we say, oh, Thanksgiving, like I'm eating all these things, right? And it's like, okay, well, how many Thanksgivings a year do we have? Right? We have one Thanksgiving a year. And, you know, what does our body do with food? Over a 24 and 48-hour period, our body can digest food fully. And then it's just excreted. That's the general process. And also we think about like overall, what does my food diversity look like? Right. And so I think that like a lot of the foods that we do have on Thanksgiving come from Southern cooking. And Southern cooking comes from enslaved cooking. And enslaved cooking uh, essentially is the knowledge of Africans who were making the most with what they had at the time. Um, and so I put it this way: I don't think you should stress about Thanksgiving. I don't. I think it's one day. I think in the scheme of our entire lives, like if one day of cooking was a thing that changed your health, we would have so many different discussions, and so many different problems. Like our bodies do not fluctuate in that way, right? I think something that's not talked about is what does stress do? Like there's actually studies that show that if you're stressing out about the food that you're eating, that it actually impairs your metabolism. So while we're here having that guilt and that shame, making comments like, oh, it's my cheat day, or having a moment of just like, oh, I'm being so bad right now, what we're doing is we're not only shaming the food, but we're shaming ourselves, right? And we're attributing this one day to the reason why X, Y, and Z isn't happening for us, which is, not necessarily a good mindset to have. It's kind of like going into that rigidity mind mindset. And then also like what if that's one of the most sustainable meals you have, right? Like you named protein, you named carbohydrates, you named fat, you even named vegetables, right? So I think it's just like getting out of this place of like judging food and really getting into a place of you can't truly be mindful with food until you remove the judgments. Like there was a part of me when I was becoming a dietitian that thought that like if I didn't have a salad, I wouldn't eat it. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't eat salads. I don't. As a dietitian, I don't eat salads. I can come out here and tell everybody I don't want a salad. If I have a salad, it's like what's happening with her. She's going through something in life. But I will have pumpkin soup. I will have my squash. I will have my broccoli. I will have cooked vegetables. I think it just looks differently. But there's always this expectation of what our plates should look like.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask my last question, but before that, is there anything that you wanted to make sure that you talked about today that the folks watching should know about, or that you just wanted to get off your chest?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we can do another discussion on this. But I think it's really important to know that like there are foods that do help to promote better mental health. But I think one of the most important things that improves mental health is having these kinds of discussions, talking about things, really assessing your mindset, right? Like, what is the mindset? Are we in a rigidity mindset? Are we in a scarcity mindset? Are we in an emotional mindset? And how does that affect how we eat? Um, and then also, as I said, on the biological side of things, like thinking about what's the nutrition that we can add to our food that would be really important for brain health. And one of the things that I think about is um, the microbiome, which is a whole different discussion, but it's basically like your gut and how it interacts with your brain. And so there's a lot of studies going on. My master's is in genetics, so I spent a lot of time really looking at that and looking at what's going to help with our bacteria in our gut and how does that help our mental health. But I think that's probably another topic that we can do at another time. But
That
just
sounds
also
great.
just kind of really looking at the mindset and is it coming from a place of fact or is it coming from a place of fear?
Okay. And so, with that, my last question was just about how generalized anxiety and depression are 20% of mental health issues among Black people, and the African diaspora studies show. So, I wanted to know what are some strategies to address these issues for folks who find themselves dealing with mental health issues and really not a good diet.
Yeah. So I think outside of that, it's really about like what is our movement looking like, you know, and also how are we taking time out for self care? And what that can look like is in terms of movement. Does that look like yoga? Does that look like, going for a walk? Does that look like connecting with nature? You know, planting, gardening, doing something that grounds us. And then on the flip side, like, what does it look like for meditation? What does it look like for trying to access, a mental health group with a licensed therapist, um, talking about these things, addressing things? What does it look like to be vulnerable, which is really, really scary to do as a Black person? Most of what we're taught for survival is do not be vulnerable, don't let them break you, and keep it all in. And the reality is there's so many studies that are coming out that is showing that that particular cycle of dealing with things not only causes more stress, but within the body, that's the stress will sit. So it starts to sit in our shoulders and our lower back. And that chronic pain that our doctors are like, well, you just need to do this, but it's not really helping, right? Like that is, those are spaces where, we need to kind of like think about like what is it what does it mean to really hold it all on my own? And for some of that us, it's a reality that we have to do that, and it's heartbreaking. But I think some of the things that I do on a daily basis, every day I take a 5-minute meditation for breathing. And does it solve all my problems? No, but I definitely feel calm. If I have situations that stress me out, I try to give them some time or as much time as I can to sit with them to make sure that I'm able to be in a calmer space when I make that decision. And then self care, whatever that looks like. Um, Currently, I have been doing a lot of morning walks before everyone wakes up in my neighborhood and just taking deep breaths, feeling the cold air, really just like gearing myself up for the day, taking myself to do things, celebrating the little things, in whichever way is accessible to you. And I do think one of the biggest things is that compassion for yourself, right? We're not robots. We shouldn't be the same thing every day. We're not required to be, and we need to have that for ourselves.
I'm so thankful for your expertise this morning, this Saturday morning, early on a Saturday morning. And we've learned so much today, and I want to encourage everyone watching to be mindful of what you're eating because it can affect the health of your mental faculties. So, thank you, Brianne, for all of your wonderful advice and education today. I wanted to ask you to tell us your social media tags and how people can get in touch with you and your services.
Yeah, so you can see below, eatforsuccess.com is my website. You can follow me on Instagram, which is at e.a.t for success. It's also on the bottom. And also, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, Brianne Brathwaite is not a common name, so you can just type it in and you'll see my face. So, yeah, I believe those are the ways that you can reach me. I also do have a book. If you go to my website, let me show it right now. It's called The Recipe for Authentic Living, and it's a self help cookbook. So you can essentially go through it. It has a lot of whoop, really cool recipes and work pages, and it just helps you to kind of like take a different take on food and also self care and self love.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, that's all for our show today. Thank you all for tuning in to Black Mental Health Matters. To support our show, please visit bmhm.org. And for the latest conversations on Black mental health, please follow us on all social media platforms. Thank you so much again, Brianne. Very nice to meet you, and I hope we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much for today.